Its father spread pandemonium throughout the Midwest. Its arrival will thrill a nation. Its legacy is destined to change the world. Presenting Son of Beast, the world's tallest, fastest, only looping wooden roller coaster. Son of Beast, only at Kings Island.
Warning, some viewers may be too lame to enjoy the following information.
Son of Beast, one of the most legendary but also polarizing roller coasters of all time. For one, it still remains the tallest and fastest wooden roller coaster that has ever been built to this date, and it will probably remain that way for a very long time. Watching these videos from the early 2000s, the ride looks majestic, and it was also the first modern day wooden roller coaster to feature a vertical loop. But on the contrary, the ride was also one of the roughest roller coasters ever created. Upon its completion in the year 2000, the ride quickly gained a reputation for just how brutal of an experience it offered due to a pattern of structural issues. And this is when the coaster was brand new. And what a shame, because Son of Beast was poised to be quite the crowd pleaser, standing at a height of 218 feet or 66.5 meters, and reaching speeds of 78.4 miles per hour or 126.2 kilometers per hour. This wooden mega roller coaster should have been extremely popular. And while it certainly attracted crowds, it left many riders unfortunately disappointed with its rough and unenjoyable experience. The ride would only operate at Kings Island for not even 9 years. In 2006, it would suffer a nearly catastrophic accident that would send 27 riders to the hospital. And in 2012, this happened. What exactly went wrong with this wooden mega roller coaster? In this video, we will be taking an in-depth look at Son of Beast to learn about all of its problems and also what caused them. Before we get started, if you guys wouldn't mind hitting the like button, that would be greatly appreciated, as that helps the channel greatly against the YouTube algorithm. Alright, let's dig in. During the late 20th and early 21st century, a major competition was occurring amongst amusement parks all over the world, especially in the United States. Parks had the goal of introducing the latest record-breaking roller coaster to capture the attention of the masses and to attract new guests. The craze really kicked off in 1989 when Cedar Point in Sandusky, Ohio introduced Magnum XL 200, the world's tallest and fastest roller coaster, and also the world's first hyper roller coaster. As defined by Cedar Fair, the parent company of Cedar Point, a hyper roller coaster is any coaster that stands over the height of 200 feet or 61 meters. Standing at a height of 205 feet or 62.5 meters, Magnum opened to a massive amount of hype. Now, Magnum was a steel roller coaster, and with steel, it was easier to build them taller and faster due to the nature of the material. On the contrary, wooden roller coasters require an enormous amount of wooden structure even for smaller coasters. So wooden coasters are typically built smaller than steel coasters because they are more complex to design, take longer to build, and also require more maintenance since wood does not last as long as steel. But the roller coaster wars would also influence wooden roller coasters. In 1990, Six Flags Over Texas would introduce Texas Giant, the world's tallest wooden roller coaster. Texas Giant stood at a height of 143 feet, or 43.6 meters, and absolutely dwarfed other wooden coasters. In order to build Texas Giant, over 900,000 board feet, or 2,100 cubic meters of wood was used. Only 1 year later, in 1991, Cedar Point would introduce the next world's tallest wooden coaster, Mean Streak, a 161-foot or 49-meter tall mammoth of a wooden roller coaster. Being a larger coaster, Mean Streak required an even more impressive 1.7 million board feet or 4,000 cubic meters of lumber to build. And once again, only 1 year later in 1992, another record-breaking wooden coaster was built at Fiesta, Texas, a brand new amusement park in San Antonio. That coaster was named Rattler and stood at a height of 179.7 feet or 54.8 meters. The ride was built on a quarry wall and plunged riders down a 166-foot or 50.6 meter drop at speeds of 73 miles per hour or 117.5 kilometers per hour. Combined, this made Rattler the tallest and also the fastest wooden roller coaster in the world. Well, on May 11th of 1999, Kings Island in Mason, Ohio, which at the time went by Paramount's Kings Island, would shock the world when they announced this. Son of Beast would open in 2000 as the world's tallest, fastest, and only looping wooden roller coaster. The ride would stand at a height of 218 feet or 66.5 meters, feature a 214-foot or 65.2 meter drop, reach speeds of 78.4 miles per hour or 126.2 kilometers per hour, have a track length of 7,032 feet or 2,143.4 meters, and feature the exclusive 118-foot or 36-meter tall vertical loop halfway through the ride. And being that the ride stood over 200 feet tall, this would categorize Son of Beast as the world's first wooden hyper roller coaster. And it stood 13 feet taller than the first hyper roller coaster, Magnum XL 200, while being made of wood. Son of Beast was based off another record-breaking roller coaster that Kings Island had introduced in 1979, the Beast. Kings Island actually designed and built the Beast in-house, and when the ride first opened, it was the tallest, fastest, and longest wooden roller coaster in the world. Today, the Beast still remains the world's longest wooden roller coaster, with a track length of 7,359 feet, or 2,243 meters. Son of Beast was exactly what its name implied. It was the son of the Beast. Except rather than being a low-to-the-ground terrain roller coaster like its father, it instead focused on height and featured many gigantic hills. It was even designed to feature 2 large helixes instead of just the one found on its father, the first of the 2 helixes being taller in height than the Beast. Upon announcement, Son of Beast seemed like it was poised to dominate the roller coaster market, but we all know that Son of Beast failed. And one of the first reasons as to why that is due to the company hired to deliver the attraction, the infamous Roller Coaster Corporation of America, or RCCA. RCCA is a pretty well-known manufacturer amongst roller coaster enthusiasts, but for all the wrong reasons. RCCA have produced some of the worst wooden roller coasters in existence. I'm talking poor designs, poor build quality, and just awful layouts that lead to painfully rough and unenjoyable experiences for riders. The company's first roller coaster was Rattler at Fiesta, Texas, the wooden monster I mentioned earlier. Construction of Rattler was rushed, and the ride's build quality was atrocious. Watching videos of the ride from 1992, the track work just looks unacceptable. The transitions and banking look painfully awkward, and parts of the coaster just look wrong. Fiesta, Texas, which now goes by Six Flags Fiesta, Texas, would have to modify portions of Rattler each and every year. That ride deserves its own video. RCCA would deliver a few more wooden roller coasters between Rattler and Son of Beast, including White Canyon at Yomiuri near Tokyo, Japan, Montezuma at Hopi Hari and Venado, Brazil, and Wild Wild West, which now goes by the name Bandit at Movie Park, Germany. None of these coasters are any good. When the time came for Kings Island to attempt to build their record-breaking idea of a wooden roller coaster, they most likely approached several different manufacturers. RCCA were known for purposely underbidding on projects. By this, I mean the company would purposely say it would cost less to build their coaster than it really would. In turn, parks would be more likely to select RCCA over other manufacturers due to the cheap build price. Naturally, RCCA were seeking to earn a profit with their projects, so they would cut corners later down the road in order to keep design and build costs extremely low. Paramount's Kings Island apparently began talking with RCCA around 1997 about the concept of a hyper wooden roller coaster, and would ultimately select the firm to build Son of Beast. Kings Island had fallen into RCCA's trap, which brings us closer to the demise of Son of Beast. Now, while RCCA was the company who were contracted for building Son of Beast, they would actually pass off responsibility to a shell company they would create, the Roller Coaster Corporation of Ohio. According to Investopedia.com, a shell corporation is a corporation without active business operations or significant assets. These types of corporations are not all necessarily illegal, but are sometimes used illegitimately, such as to disguise business ownership from law enforcement or to the public. So already, RCCA was off to no good. It seems the plan was to pass responsibility to their new shell corporation, who would actually take responsibility for designing and building Son of Beast. And after the project was finished, RCCA would dissolve the shell corporation, leaving nothing behind for someone to potentially come after or sue. To me, it seems like the company was already laying the groundwork to avoid losing a potential lawsuit to Kings Island. Things were already looking very shady. The newly formed Roller Coaster Corporation of Ohio, which was basically just RCCA working under a different name, would subcontract a few other firms to help design and construct Son of Beast. One of these companies would be Stengel Engineering, founded by famous roller coaster designer Werner Stengel. Werner Stengel is well known in the amusement park industry for his many breakthrough designs, like the clothoid loop, used on all modern day roller coasters, and the concept of heart-lining roller coaster track, where track twists and rotates around the rider's heart line, rather than track rotating around its own center, which helps to keep coasters much smoother. Stengel Engineering is a go-to engineering consulting firm within the amusement industry. The firm has worked as the designer for over 400 roller coasters across the globe, including many noteworthy rides like Millennium Force at Cedar Point. Many of the coasters the firm has worked on are known as some of the world's best. The company provides various engineering and design services such as overall design, design of roller coaster track following spline curves, computation of all forces reacting on passengers, stress analysis, structure analysis, and fatigue analysis, and many more. Now, based on the reputation of Stengel Engineering and how poorly Son of Beast would perform, I have a feeling the firm was only subcontracted to compute the forces that would act on riders and maybe some of the track's design, but definitely not to perform the overall design of stress and structural analysis on the ride. Otherwise, Son of Beast would have most likely performed much better. Instead, the Roller Coaster Corporation of Ohio chose Wooden Structures Inc., an engineering office based in Georgia, as the lead structural engineering firm. So it would be Wooden Structures who actually designed the ride structure and calculated for stress analysis as well as fatigue. I imagine RCCA chose this firm because they were cheaper than others, which helped RCCA keep design and build price of the coaster low. I'll get more into the structural issues of Son of Beast later in this video, but for now, just know that based on the problems the ride would have, there is no way that Wooden Structures Inc. performed an adequate job. The project will continue forward, and construction on Son of Beast would kick into high gear during the 1999 season. Paramount's Kings Island were directly in charge of the construction themselves. A massive number of trees were cleared to make way for the enormous wooden coaster. Son of Beast would occupy a total of 12 acres of hilly terrain, or over 48,500 square meters. For the ride's foundation, over 2,400 concrete footers were dug 11 feet, or 3.4 meters into the ground. Even with the ride's under-designed structure, a massive amount of wood was still required to construct it, over 2.5 million board feet, or 5,900 cubic meters of it. And holding together the wooden structure would require over 225,000 steel bolts and over 22 tons, or nearly 20,000 kilograms of nails. Construction crews would continue to clear land, pour concrete footers, and erect the wooden structure that was made of southern yellow pine. Time would continue into the winter, where the ride's structure continued to grow. While construction may have appeared smooth from the point of view of an outsider, apparently not all was going well. Remember how I mentioned RCCA were up to no good? Well, apparently some of the problems became apparent during construction, and it was so bad that Paramount's Kings Island fired RCCA entirely from the project. Another major setback would occur on January 11th of 2000. A section of structure on the second hill that had been assembled the day before would unfortunately collapse due to strong gusts of wind in excess of 55 miles per hour, or 88.5 kilometers per hour. This section was 50 feet by 100 feet, or 15 meters by 30 meters, and was only held in place using temporary ribbons, or support pieces. Kings Island released a statement about it shortly afterwards, and claimed the damage wasn't as severe as it seemed, and the ride should still open on time for the 2000 season. And as crazy as this was, I think this was still one of the smaller issues Kings Island would ultimately have with Son of Beast. The vertical loop was constructed using a steel structure. The track, however, remained wooden throughout the entire loop. Rather than southern yellow pine, all of Son of Beast wooden track was constructed using 8 stacks of Douglas fir lumber. Construction of Son of Beast would end up running behind schedule, and the park would miss the deadline for the originally planned opening day of April 14th, 2000. The park blamed excess rain during construction for the delay. Construction would continue into the night, thanks to the addition of lights that were added along the track's layout. Son of Beast would officially open to the public 2 weeks late on April 28th of 2000. Early reports of the coaster were actually quite favorable of it. Some even said the coaster was quite smooth and also extremely intense, especially the vertical loop and first helix. The ride began with a large 51-foot or 15.5 meter left-hand drop. The train rose back up and then dropped through a 180-degree left-hand turn where your on-ride photo was taken, and then you began to climb the gigantic lift hill. After a loud ascent, the train reached the top and descended down a wide left turn and back up into the ride's main drop. It appears tire drives were set up at the top of the first drop, which may indicate a speed issue here. The train would then dive down the 214-foot first drop, sloped at 55.7 degrees. The train would hit the bottom and reach its top speed of 78.4 miles per hour. Next, the ride would climb up and bank to 68.9 degrees as it turned right. After reaching the top of the second hill, the train would plunge 164.1 feet at an angle of 43.3 degrees as it banked left and entered the massive 540-degree Rose Bowl. The train would climb back up through a left-hand helix. After rounding the top, the ride would drop 150 feet at an angle of 37.3 degrees into the second half of the Rose Bowl. The train would then climb back up and into the ride's mid-course brake run. The mid-course was quite long and was designed to either slow trains slightly or even speed them up a bit with the use of booster tires. The goal was for trains to hit the vertical loop with a speed of 62.3 miles per hour or 100.3 kilometers per hour every cycle. Next would come a slight left curve and a massive drop into the ride's vertical loop. This would send trains flying through the loop, delivering riders a great dose of positive G-forces. A good number of people say that this was their favorite vertical loop ever. Next, the train would climb up into the second helix, this time turning to the right. This helix was located on the inside of the ride's first drop and lift hill and was overall much less intense than the first helix earlier in the ride. The train would exit the 540-degree helix and climb into a very spread out camelback, which didn't deliver any airtime. This would lead into a right-hand curve, where the train climbed back up into one last hill before diving underneath the camelback and then up into the final brake run, ending the ride. One early review said that they were very impressed with the ride. Their expectations for the coaster were very high, and they were ultimately exceeded. They claimed Paramount's Kings Island had a winner on their hands, and that Son of Beast had nice laterals, speed, and sometimes a few pops of airtime here and there. They even called the ride very different, and overall, very original. They claimed that many members of the general public were also favorable of the attraction, and even called it the best coaster ever.
The thing with those trains, though, is that they were absolutely heavy. There was no signs of weight reduction to them whatsoever. You would go through the Rose Bowl and it wouldn't necessarily be all that bad. The train would stay relatively planted to the track and not have much side-to-side give. It was still rough, but it wasn't as rough as it would become in its later years of operation.
But one problem that was already noticeable on day one was a powerful jolt felt by riders as the train ascended the second hill. During the climb up the second hill, the track would bank to 68.9 degrees, with the goal of smoothly transitioning riders into a right-hand turn. Unfortunately, the train would jolt violently left to right. Riders would slam against the side of the car and also into the rider next to them. As a result, Son of Beast would unfortunately close after just one weekend of operation and would stay closed for an entire month. The park's official reasoning was to fix this 15-foot or 4.6 meter rough patch of track causing the jolt. But apparently, there was much more going on that also led to the closure. The ride's original track work was already showing signs of significant wear, which was causing it to age much faster than anticipated. This was caused by the inadequately designed structure, which was moving too much side to side, especially on the ride's helixes. Movement of structure is good because it allows the structure to properly absorb forces. The tree that bends doesn't break. But the problem was the structure was moving more than it was designed to.
A board came loose. It was just twirling in the wind, being held to the ride by just one corner. This board just tick breaks loose and falls all the way through the entirety of the superstructure all the way to the ground.
During the 1-month closure, anchored cables were installed in the centers of the helix to try to reduce lateral swing. Additional wooden structure was also added. After a series of modifications, the ride finally opened on May 26th of 2000 and was only allowed to operate with one train. The one-train operations were an effort to help reduce repetitive stress on the structure, which still required more modification. This led to lines in excess of 3 hours to get a ride on the all-new Son of Beast. And keep in mind, the ride was designed to run 3 trains. The funny thing is the ride wasn't properly capable of running 3 trains. For those of you who are unfamiliar, a block zone is a section of ride that only one train may occupy. At the end of a block zone is a method to stop a train in case the block zone ahead is still occupied. This is the safety system that prevents roller coaster trains from colliding into one another. RCCA claimed that Son of Beast was capable of running 3 trains and could operate with an hourly capacity of 1,600 riders per hour. With each train holding 36 passengers, to achieve 1,600 riders per hour, 45 trains would need to be dispatched each hour, so a dispatch from the station about every 80 seconds. Now let me show you why 3 train operations weren't really ideal, structural issues aside. Here we have the block zone diagram of Son of Beast. First, we have the station block zone, then the lift hill block zone, followed by the Rose Bowl block zone, which is all the track after the lift hill leading to the mid-course brake run. And lastly, the vertical loop block zone, which is all the track afterwards until the final brake run. So a total of 4 block zones. Now 4 block zones are technically enough to run 3 trains. That's how many block zones Magnum XL 200 or Millennium Force at Cedar Point have, and they run 3 trains no problem. But looking closer at Son of Beast, the final brake run was only capable of holding 1 train. So with a train loading in the station and a train stopped on the final brake run, the 3rd train would have to stop on the mid-course brake run, following the Rose Bowl and before the loop. Unlike Millennium Force or Magnum, where the 3rd train is able to stop at the end of the ride, Son of Beast therefore had an extremely old-school block setup, like Gemini at Cedar Point. Because of this, the ride crew would essentially have to dispatch the next train as soon as the train ahead cleared the main lift hill. Then about 10 seconds later, the train waiting on the final brake run could roll into the station. Because of where this train stacks on the final brake run, It took nearly 30 seconds for this train to actually roll in, meaning it would park in the station about 40 seconds after the last train was dispatched, which is an awfully long time. By this point, the train that was just dispatched from the station would be well on its way up the lift hill, and the train traveling the main track would be entering the mid-course brake run. The ride crew would only then have about 50 seconds tops to load the train in the station and then dispatch it. If they took any longer than that, the train on the main track would approach the station and be forced to stack on the final brake run. The next train would then be on the main track, approaching the mid-course brake run, where it would be forced to stop. So ride operators essentially had no buffer time, and needed to keep all 3 trains in motion at all times, and stacking a single train in the final brake run could cause the third train to set up on the mid-course. It wasn't ideal for a train to stop on the mid-course, because from a dead stop, the train would absolutely crawl through the vertical loop. Son of Beast really needed a 5th block zone directly before the station, which there certainly was room for, but it was ultimately never added, probably because the park had no interest in ever running 3 trains on the track due to the structural issues. Son of Beast would continue to run with 1 train ops for a few months, until it was finally allowed to run 2. And 2 trains would be the most the ride would ever run with, as the park took the 3rd train off the track and used it as a spare going forward. The ride's trains were designed and manufactured by Premier Rides. Each train was 6 cars long, and each car had 3 rows, and could hold 6 riders each. Holding riders in was only a lap bar restraint, and not an over-the-shoulder restraint. Aside from Schwarzkopf, nearly every manufacturer who produced looping roller coasters during that era utilized over-the-shoulder restraints, so this was quite a cool feature on Son of Beast. The trains featured many advancements that were needed for Son of Beast, but also a pretty major setback, with Son of Beast reaching speeds of 78.4 miles per hour, or 126.2 kilometers per hour. The ride featured 12-inch diameter, or 30.5 centimeter wheels to account for higher speeds. Larger wheels are better for high speeds, since they do not have to spin as much, which helps lead to a smoother ride, and also less wear and tear on the wheels themselves. The trains also featured dual articulating axles on each car, meaning both axles could steer independently of the car. And even with each car being 3 rows long, the cars were still able to navigate tight corners and transitions thanks to the articulating axles and also the front axle's position. Rather than being right at the start of each car, the front axle was placed underneath the seats of the first row. This brought the axles closer together and helped the train travel tighter corners and was a big help with the vertical loop. However, the major downside of the trains was their weight. The larger wheels and articulating axles helped add to that. Each car reportedly weighed 2,700 pounds, or about 1,225 kilograms when empty of riders, and then 3,750 pounds, or 1,701 kilograms when loaded with riders. This means an empty train of 6 cars weighed 16,200 pounds, or 7,348 kilograms, and a loaded train weighed a whopping 22,500 pounds, or 10,206 kilograms. That is extremely hefty for a wooden coaster train. In fact, during the ride's opening year, Kings Island maintenance members said the ride featured the heaviest trains at the park. It's common for steel roller coasters to run trains that weigh this much, as steel track and structure are better suited to handle such forces. But wooden coasters usually run lighter trains to place less stress on the wooden structures. These heavy coaster trains are a large part of why the coaster became so rough. I never had the misfortune of riding this monstrosity, but here are a few testimonies from people who did ride the original version with the loop.
So I was 12 years old when I rode Son of Beast, and I don't remember much in terms of forces or laterals, anything like that, but I do remember it was the roughest coaster I ever rode, without a doubt.
So Ryan asked me to come on and talk about Son of Beast. If you can't tell by my shirt, it's been a minute since I rode it. The design was just terrible. It was visually amazing, no doubt, but when you're on the track, just constant jackhammering, and the layout, just no excitement. You have those giant helices just constantly shaking your brain around as you just go in those big giant circles. And okay, the loop was good. That's the one good redeeming part. But when I got back from that trip and I did my top 20, I only rode about 50 coasters at the time, and Son of Beast didn't even make the top 20. That's how bad it was.
As you can tell, Son of Beast was not an enjoyable ride whatsoever. Remember how I said RCCA took shortcuts to bring the cost of the ride down? Well, here's how they did that. They limited the number of bents used throughout the ride. Bents are the vertical sections of wood that rise from the concrete footers in the ground, all the way up to the ledgers that support the track. Here's a shot of a bent being placed into position during the ride's construction. The bents are connected to each other with the use of wooden pieces called ribbons. Together, this leads to a rigid wooden structure that will support the track. On most modern wooden roller coasters, the number of bents will double during high stress areas. like on the valleys in between two hills, where positive g-forces increase, or on turns, where g-forces also increase. This helps form a more dense and rigid structure, and also leads to double the ledgers, which means more support for the wooden track. While RCCA didn't do this with Son of Beast, almost every valley on the coaster features the same number of ledgers as in lower stress moments of the ride. Taking a look at the bottom of the first drop, the number of bends only doubles right as the train begins to bottom out, and then immediately goes back to bends placed at a regular distance from each other. And taking a look at the rest of the ride, the bottom of the helixes and the bottom of basically every drop have bends placed at a normal distance and not more densely. By placing less bends around the ride, RCCA were able to save on the cost of designing more structure, pouring additional concrete footers to support these bends, the cost of the additional materials to create them, and the additional cost of constructing them. This left a structure that was technically quote-unquote good enough, but not enough to ensure a smooth ride for years to come. Thus, the track began to sag between each bend, as the bends were placed too far away from each other, and with the structure moving more than it was designed to, this did not help keep the track rigid and in its original shape. With trains traveling at such high speeds, even the smallest of imperfections were quickly noticeable, and would cause the trains to jostle around. The funny thing is that aside from the structural issues, Son of Beast was actually a really reliable ride. The programming, sensors, and trains hardly caused any errors or shutdowns, and the ride would smoothly operate from open to close, so the main issue was really that the structure couldn't stay in one piece. Now, the vertical loop was the only part of the ride that remained smooth throughout its entire lifespan, and was ultimately known as the best part of Son of Beast. A big reason for that was the rigid steel structure used on the loop that provided a strong backbone for the wooden track. The steel structure contained a large amount of connections between itself and the track. There's practically one every 2 feet or so. This meant that the track was properly supported, and most likely did not deteriorate or sag between each connection, thus leading to a smooth experience that stayed smooth for years, even with the heavy trains. Now, even with the loop being the smoothest and overall best part of Son of Beast, it ironically did cause the ride's roughness. Kings Island wanted the loop placed mid-ride, and they wanted the loop to be large. To make that possible, heavier than normal trains were used on purpose, as heavier trains would ensure more momentum mid-ride to complete such a large loop of 118 feet or 36 meters. Because of all the problems with Son of Beast, in November of 2000, Paramount's Kings Island would actually file a lawsuit against the Roller Coaster Corporation of Ohio, as well as Wooden Structures Inc. of Georgia and Universal Forest Products of Ohio, who supplied the lumber used on the ride. The suit claimed that the design of Son of Beast contained many defects and an insufficient support structure. This bad design and poor construction forced the delayed opening of the ride, and also numerous closures during its opening year, which was bad publicity for Kings Island. Michael Black, a managing partner of the Roller Coaster Corporation of Ohio, were to release a statement saying it was Kings Island's desire to save money, not shoddy design, that doomed Son of Beast. When the park ran into budget problems early in the ride's development stage, they advised Black's company that they could no longer afford to hire an experienced contractor, and that they would build the coaster themselves in-house. Black apparently strongly advised against this, and then further claimed that Kings Island did not follow their recommendations or the procedures laid out by Wood Structures Inc., and that this led to many problems during the construction of the ride, including a partial structural collapse. Kings Island would make further statements that Son of Beast was still a safe attraction to ride, but the lawsuit was an attempt to dispute contracted payments that are due to the Roller Coaster Corporation of Ohio. Mr. Black would later file a lawsuit for breach of contract against Kings Island. I'm not entirely sure of the outcome of either lawsuit, but I think the real losers would be the guests who continued to ride Son of Beast. Son of Beast, or SOB, would continue to operate for several years, during which it was still extremely rough. During this time, Kings Island continuously made modifications, by altering the structure to improve smoothness, and also to create a more stable platform for track. Kings Island worked under the guidance of RV Anderson Associates Limited, or RVA, with this task. Together, work was carried out to reduce lateral movement of the structure and the resultant wear on wood components. The excess movement of the structure was creating dynamic conditions not accounted for in the design, or long-term maintenance of the structure. The majority of modifications increased the stiffness of the structure, which was good, but also increased the load bearing on individual components. We'll get into that later. In 2005, Son of Beast trains were reduced from 6 cars to 5 cars long. I imagine this was done to lighten the load on the structure, and I'm honestly surprised this wasn't done earlier in the ride's career. Meanwhile, RCCA claimed on their website that Son of Beast could run up to 7-car trains, which would have brought the weight of a fully loaded train to 26,250 pounds, or about 11,906 kilograms. I think they were out of their minds. On May 22nd of 2006, Cedar Fair Entertainment Company announced that they had outbid competitors and intended to purchase all 5 Paramount parks for $1.24 billion US. The purchase would complete on June 30th of 2006, and Cedar Fair took responsibility and began operating all Paramount parks, including Kings Island. Only 9 days later, Son of Beast would throw a massive middle finger to Cedar Fair and send 27 riders to the hospital. On July 9th of 2006, an accident occurred in the Rose Bowl when a train was passing through the first lap of the Helix. While the train rode through bent number 290, a vertical member of the bent fractured and failed, leading the 2 other vertical members to fail as well. This caused the structure in the track to sag 5 inches, or nearly 13 centimeters. Guests on this train probably felt a large pothole, but the train completed the track and returned to the station as normal. The next train cresting the lift hill, however, would not come out as unscathed. With the track sagging and structure critically weakened at bent 290, this train rode the full force of the damage, and riders most likely felt an abrupt jolt, similar to a violent car accident. Fortunately, even with the damage to the structure, the train continued through the course and made it back to the station. Ride operators quickly made note of the injured state guests were in upon the train's arrival to the station, and stopped the other train which was climbing the lift hill. Riders on the stopped train were then evacuated from the lift. Had this other train not been stopped, further damage to the structure could have caused a much worse jolt for riders or even a potential catastrophic failure. As a result of this accident, all 27 guests aboard the scathed train were taken to the hospital. Most of these injured guests reported head and neck injuries, and thankfully no guests had any life-threatening injuries. All but 2 of the victims were released from the hospital that day. The ride remained closed as a further investigation took place to find the root of the problem. On July 27th of 2006, SEA Limited was requested to evaluate Son of Beast and find out how exactly the structural failure occurred. This investigation took place between July 20th to September 28th of that year, in close coordination with the Ohio Department of Agriculture, as well as Cedar Fair and Kings Island. There was a fear that problems from the original design, combined with modifications made to the structure over time, created a much larger problem that would make it unsafe to ever reopen Son of Beast. SEA would report back many findings. One was that there were no deficiencies in the physical properties of the failed wooden members. In fact, it was found that the southern yellow pine was within or above industry strength specifications. Instead, it was determined that the structure was improperly designed and caused certain members to experience forces that were beyond the load specifications of the southern yellow pine used on the ride. Additionally, the work that Kings Island and RVA had done to increase the stiffness of the structure unfortunately further concentrated loads on these individual members. Thus, the improvements that were made increased the vulnerability of an already existing design deficiency. In the case of the accident, the original vertical member that failed was loaded above its design limit due to an arrangement issue with other supporting members. Without using too many physics terms, too much horizontal force was placed on the specific vertical member, and not enough horizontal support was actually present at this piece to absorb the pressure. Now, even though the design capacity of this vertical member had always been exceeded during its service life, a failure had not occurred yet due to a factor of safety built into the design specifications. This means the structure was essentially over-designed to help avoid a failure. In order for the member to actually fail, the ultimate strength of the wood member had to be exceeded, meaning more force would have to be applied to that member than it could physically withstand. And the combination of structural changes in specific weather, service, or loading conditions made that happen on July 9th of 2006. Luckily, the design deficiency that caused the failure was local to just the surrounding area of bent 290. It was determined that the deficiency could be eliminated with the addition of specific structural components. However, after a full structural evaluation of the entire ride, the same design deficiency was found at another 50 locations within the structure. These locations would also need to be corrected with the same method used to fix the failure location. On top of that, a different type of design deficiency was found in another location that subjected a vertical member to an unfavorable bending load. This deficiency was also locally correctable, but the ride structure would need to be reevaluated to see if it existed in other areas. Otherwise, it was found that Son of Beast was not operating on the quote-unquote ragged edge, but was a large part of the way toward being made a safe and reliable amusement ride. Many of the ride's design deficiencies had already been corrected, but unfortunately, not all of them had been identified and corrected by the time the accident occurred. Son of Beast would remain closed for the rest of the 2006 season and into the 2007 season. During this time period, the investigation took place, and corrections to the ride's structure were made to eliminate all existing design deficiencies. Kings Island also made the choice to stop operating the heavy Premier trains on the ride. Kings Island purchased 2 Gerstlauer trains from the defunct Hurricane, which was a wooden coaster built by Custom Coasters International, which had unfortunately closed in 2006 when Myrtle Beach Pavilion closed its doors. These trains were 6 cars long, but only featured 2 rows each, thus seating a total of 24 passengers per train. This ultimately lowered Son of Beast's capacity drastically. Unfortunately, these lighter trains would not be able to sustain enough momentum through the ride to complete the vertical loop. As a result, the loop would unfortunately have to be removed. This meant the best part of Son of Beast was now leaving, and it would ultimately be replaced with a small bunny hop. The quote-unquote new and improved Son of Beast would reopen on July 4th of 2007. Kings Island had claimed the new upgrades would hopefully lead to an improved and more comfortable riding experience for guests. But did it really?
The Gerstlauer trains, not good. You never want a Gerstlauer train on a wooden coaster.
Those Gerstlauer trains were designed around a CCI that was not nearly as intense. There was just so much lateral motion as the train was traversing forward. The thing just beat you up.
Yes, I rode Son of Beast with the Gerstlauer trains, and let me tell you, it was terrible. We left the station and the train was bouncing to the point that it hurt. The train felt like it had octagon wheels. And when you went through the Rose Bowl, my whole body shook. It felt my bones vibrating. I had never felt that roughness on a wooden coaster in my life. And I grew up on the Coney Island Cyclone.
So if anything, this version of Son of Beast was even worse than before. For one, it didn't have the vertical loop, aka the best part of the ride. It sounds like it was just as rough as before, and with reduced capacity, you may have had to wait even longer for a ride that would have just beat you to hell. The new and improved Son of Beast would continue to operate until June 16th of 2009, when a woman claimed to have suffered from a burst blood vessel in her brain after taking a ride. This required her to be admitted to an intensive care unit at a nearby hospital. Apparently, this woman rode on May 31st of that year and did not go to Kings Island's first aid for any assistance at the park. Kings Island would find out about this on June 16th and close the ride immediately as a precaution. An investigation would take place and actually found no issues with the ride. However, Kings Island never reopened Son of Beast. On March 15th of 2010, Kings Island stated that the park had spent nearly $30 million on Son of Beast to that date, and the ride originally cost $15 million to build, so it's like they built 2 of them. In the following years, the park would remove all mention of Son of Beast from their website and park map. Even the ride's signage at its main entrance was also removed. The ride would sit closed until July 27th of 2012, when the park announced that they would be removing Son of Beast to make room for future expansion. Demolition began in September of that year as crews began tearing down the coaster and letting it crumble down to earth. On November 20th of 2012, the ride's lift hill was torn down as one of the last remaining structures of Son of Beast. In April of 2014, Kings Island would debut Banshee, an inverted roller coaster built by Bolliger and Mabillard. Banshee operates on part of the land Son of Beast used to occupy, and overall delivers a much better ride than Son of Beast probably ever did. Son of Beast was quite the problematic roller coaster, and was probably doomed to fail as soon as Kings Island signed a contract with the Roller Coaster Corporation of America. I'm not sure if Intamin's prefabricated wooden coaster was available when Kings Island first sought out to build Son of Beast, but had they waited a few years and were more willing to spend extra money, I'm sure a prefab version of Son of Beast would have been structurally sound, and not to mention, also a much better ride that would have probably had a much better layout, with many moments of ejector airtime. It really makes me wonder if officials from Paramount and Kings Island ever rode an RCCA coaster and just loved how brutal they were. Paramount Parks was definitely a big push as to why Son of Beast was built. They built a lot of strange rides. Nonetheless, Son of Beast would go down in history as one of the largest wooden roller coasters to ever be constructed, and also one of the biggest failures in the amusement industry. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I hope you learned something new. Be sure to like and subscribe, and comment down below if you ever got the chance to get beat up on Son of Beast. Thanks for watching, everyone. Peace.